It all began with the flicker of August 6th, 2025. A moment so quiet, so sterile in the laboratory, yet so troubling in its consequences. The James Webb Telescope, the most powerful observational device in human history, was forced into emergency control mode, not because of a supernova nor a black hole, but due to something much closer and more terrifying. A comet, or at least something resembling it, designated as Tri-I-Atlas. At first, they thought it was just another interstellar traveler, cold, silent, and predictable. But when James Webb's sensors detected the object and the first wave of data flooded the system, what they captured was not just unexpected. It was impossible. The chemical composition he discovered did not match any natural model. The relationships were grotesque, the elements did not match, and the behavior was unpredictable. As the data continued to come in, a sense of unease began to creep into the consciousness of every astrophysicist watching the broadcast. What if this is not a comet? What if it is something else? The first sign that something went terribly wrong came from the comet's coma, a bright gas cloud surrounding its core. At such a distance, 6 astronomical units from the sun, the comet should be dormant, frozen, and inert. The sunlight there is too weak to cause any significant changes, but Tri and Atlas were already actively manifesting themselves, and quite violently. The telescope recorded spectral lines dominated not by water vapor, as expected, but by carbon dioxide. 8 times more than water. This ratio of 8-to-1 was not just unusual, it was unprecedented. Typical comets barely reached 0.7. Even Borisov, the last interstellar visitor, hovered around 0.5. It was something else, a body emitting carbon dioxide in such quantities that it could not be explained by temperature or proximity to the sun. It seemed as if the object was designed to release this specific gas in conditions where nature does not allow it. Even stranger was that the coma was ghostly and thin. There was almost no dust, no solid particles, no usual chaos, only gas. Controlled, smooth, and highly specific gas emissions indicated a different chemistry, alien to our understanding of comet formation. As the James Webb Telescope deepened its observations, the story grew darker. Its sensors detected something even more alarming than gas: nickel. Strong, stable spectral lines of nickel began to appear in the ultraviolet and near-infrared ranges. These were not traces, not anomalies, but powerful signals, clear, repetitive, and real. The lines of nickel stood out sharply against the background, increasing in concentration as the object approached. At a distance of 3.8 astronomical units, the output was already measured at more than 10 to the 21st power atoms per second. At 2.85 astronomical units, this increased by a whole order. But the shock was not in the presence of nickel. It was about what was absent: iron. On all instruments, from Webb to the Very Large Telescope and Gemini, there was no iron, no signals, no traces, not even noise. This is abnormal. In all known natural comets and meteorites, nickel and iron always go hand in hand. The ratio is strictly fixed: 1 part nickel to 15 parts iron. But 3 atlases violated this rule in the most brutal way. The nickel in them exceeded the iron by more than 40 times. There are no known natural processes capable of causing such separation. In laboratories, the separation of these metals requires energy, equipment, and intention. And so, drifting silently in space, there was an object that did this passively, or perhaps not passively at all. Even before the chemical signatures were fully deciphered, something else caught the attention of the Pan-STARRS surveillance network. 3 atlases were accelerating, but not in the way a comet would, not due to solar heating or pressure. He was too far from the sun, too cold for sublimation streams to create such a level of thrust. Yet, in just 72 hours, the object's speed increased by 12 hundredths of a meter per second squared. This number may seem insignificant, but for a body 11 kilometers wide, the size of a city, such speed is colossal. It's like a cruise liner starting to accelerate in the middle of a dead ocean without engines. The changes were not smooth. Analysts noticed microjumps, trembling oscillations superimposed on the main trajectory of movement, as if something inside the object was turning on and off. Attempts to explain this through gas emissions, cracks, or solar winds were unsuccessful. No hypotheses matched the rhythm. Nothing could explain the regularity, as it was regular. Every 7.5 hours, 3 atlases suddenly and predictably brightened, like a lighthouse. The brightness curve was not chaotic, like that of spinning debris. It moved like mechanical clocks. Some suggested it was a leaf-like surface reflecting sunlight. Others proposed the idea of a hollow rotating structure. But one thing was clear. It was not just a stone. It was something moving with precision. And this is where the scientific thrill begins. Because when all other explanations fall away, when sublimation, randomness, and chaotic structure provide no answers, there remains a possibility that no one wants to face. That the three atlases are something designed, constructed, created. Perhaps not with intention. Perhaps it is a fragment. An abandoned vessel of a civilization that vanished before forests appeared on Earth. But perhaps it is something worse. Something alive. A probe that is still active. A mechanism that still reacts. A system that sees us and does not care. The one that moves along a trajectory defined not by nature, but by design. Because no comet should awaken in deep cold, emit metallic nickel without iron, accelerate without fuel, and rotate with a mechanical rhythm. And here he is, doing all this, standing before our best instruments, not trying to hide. The reaction of the James Webb Observatory was not just technical, it was a whisper of panic, an unspoken consensus that this was abnormal. What if this is the first time we are looking directly at an alien craft? And even if we are wrong, the simple fact that we can no longer distinguish one from the other is a warning in itself. When the acceleration data sparked discussion among observatories, new information emerged that was even harder to ignore. The light curve. Photometric data from the Gemini South Observatory, collected using a test space telescope, showed a periodic increase in brightness of the object 3 atlases every 7.5 hours. There would be nothing unusual about this. Many comets and asteroids rotate and reflect sunlight in repeating patterns. But it was not chaotic rotation. The peaks of brightness were too clear, too precise. They did not fade gradually and did not flicker irregularly like a spinning irregular stone. They appeared and disappeared like a lighthouse, at perfect intervals. Even as gas emissions increased and the object accelerated, this light rhythm remained unchanged. It kept its cycle, like a metronome. This stability indicated something much more structured, something that reacted not randomly to sunlight, but with precision. Some suggested it could be a solar sail, a wide reflective structure designed to capture solar radiation. Such a system could theoretically explain both acceleration and a regular light pattern. Others proposed a rotating platform with flat panels, but everyone agreed the object's behavior did not match any known natural object. It was not rotation. It was a signal, a mechanical impulse. With each pass, it whispered the same thought to the instruments observing from Earth. I am not what you think I am. The moment everything changed did not come from the object itself, but from the people observing it. On August 6th, at 21 hours and 11 minutes Coordinated Universal Time, ground observatories sent an alarm signal to the Webb Control Center. The spectral data coming from other telescopes could not be ignored. Carbon dioxide emission levels skyrocketed, metal indicators surged sharply, and the sudden velocity curve defied all gravitational logic. That's when everything happened. Emergency redirection, an extremely rare protocol, interrupts all planned observations and diverts the James Webb Space Telescope from its long-term mission to investigate an anomaly. This decision takes precious time, fuel, and budget, and it has been implemented only a few times since the telescope's launch, never before for an interstellar object. For several minutes, the chain of referrals passed through committees, project deadlines, and ended up directly on the desk of the project's scientific supervisor. The approval had to be unanimous, and it was. The James Webb Telescope changed course, its instruments recalibrated, and at 21 hours, 17 minutes, it captured the 3 atlases using the NIRPC tool. What arrived in the first data packets was not just strange, but historic. The spectra did not show the icy imprint of the comet. They revealed carbon chemistry with such extreme, volatile nature that all known objects in the solar system paled in comparison. The decision to redirect was not just a scientific choice, it was a silent alarm signal. The most advanced telescope ever created has just paused space to pursue a machine. The deeper scientists delved into the data about space, the harder it became to find anything familiar. The ratio of carbon dioxide and water was completely out of order, but it was precisely the profile of metals that shattered all familiar notions. In every comet, asteroid, and meteorite that has ever been studied, iron and nickel were always found together. They are formed in the same stellar forges, bound by the laws of physics, and fused in ancient explosions. The ratio may vary slightly, but their alliance is beyond doubt. Not in this case. In 3 atlases, nickel was everywhere, and iron was absent. Not diminished, not masked, just vanished. All tests returned clean results. The teams working with ultraviolet spectrographs checked more than a dozen known iron lines. None were found. Nickel, on the contrary, shone brightly in the spectrum like a spotlight, with wavelengths of 3014, 3524, 3769 angstroms and above, clearly standing out against the noise. The only known process capable of such separation in the laboratory requires high-energy chemistry, industrial pressures, and precise control. The team proposed one explanation: the presence of nickel carbonyl, a volatile compound that evaporates at a temperature of just 43 degrees. But even this molecule is rare and does not explain the complete absence of iron. As a result, a spectral imprint was created that did not match anything natural. Neither with Borisov nor with Oumuamua. Nothing matched. The chemical composition turned out to be so distorted and intentional that even the most conservative minds began to wonder. What is this place? What world? Or what technology could create this? The strangest part of this unfolding mystery does not come from deep space. She comes from Earth, from museums, tombs, from ancient texts that speak of iron from the heavens. The Egyptians called it the metal of the sky. The blade buried with King Tutankhamun contains almost 11% nickel, which would have been impossible to cast using ancient tools, but perfectly matches the chemical signature of meteorites. Babylonian scribes wrote about falling stars and burning stones, always correlating them with omens of war and destruction. Elite artifacts appear throughout the ancient Near East: rings, beads, daggers made from metals richer in nickel than any local ore. Metals falling, sparkling, and evoking both awe and fear. And now, in the year 2025, we look at the sky again and see the same signature: high nickel, no iron, unknown source. The Windman pattern, a crystalline structure found only in metals formed in space, is captured on relics older than cities. Historians and physicists now ponder a question that no one has ever dared to answer. What if these artifacts were not just meteorite fragments, but evidence of contact? What if these metals were not just remnants of stars, but fragments of something that came before and has already passed by? And what if the 3 atlases are not just the next anomaly, but the next chapter in a very old book that we have only just begun to read? While scientists continue to analyze exhaust with high nickel content and carbon dioxide emissions, one researcher at Caltech noticed something alarming hidden in the thermal data. Buried in the light emanating from 3 objects, Atlas observed a subtle but steady electromagnetic rhythmic oscillation. The frequency was too regular to be random, yet too weak to be perceived as an intentional transmission. Network sensors detected this, but initially dismissed it as instrument noise. It was not so. When the emission data was converted into sound waves, they revealed a recurring rhythm. It was not music, not language, but something even more sinister: a mathematical cadence, simple intervals, Fibonacci ratios, and geometric harmonics reflecting structures found in DNA, crystal growth, and ancient architecture design. The signal was not strong enough to transmit through space, but powerful enough for nearby observers to detect. In other words, it was a trace, a kind of cosmic imprint, embedded not in radio waves, but in the behavior of the object itself. If we could hear it, then others could too. The question was not who the signal was directed at, but who had already heard it. Just a few days after the Webb management attracted global attention, geophysicists in the southern hemisphere began to record anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field. Initially, this was dismissed as fluctuations caused by minor solar activity, but the truth became increasingly difficult to ignore. Identical ultra-low frequency impulses were recorded in several places, including Antarctica, Argentina, and Western Australia, repeating at perfect 7.5-hour intervals, exactly matching the periodicity of the light curve of 3 Atlas stars. These impulses did not follow the pattern of solar storms or lightning. They did not originate from above, but came from the very Earth. Moreover, they reflected the structure of thermal frequencies hidden in the emission of the object. Something deep within the Earth's core began to resonate, not loudly, not violently, but rhythmically, as if responding, coordinating its actions like a resonator catching the hum of a forgotten melody. The thought that the ancient systems of Earth, tectonic, electromagnetic, and even biological, could synchronize with something passing through the solar system is terrifying. Not because it implies danger, but because it implies history. This is not the first time that Earth could have heard this frequency before, and everything that was at rest remembered it again. When the course of the three atlases was mapped from the entry vector to the presumed exit trajectory, it revealed something almost too perfect. The object was not simply moving through space under the influence of gravity. It was maneuvering. It avoided. Its trajectory precisely navigated around all the large bodies in the system, passing between gravitational wells like a spacecraft following a predetermined route. Compared to the natural paths of comets, which are chaotic, twisted, and react to gravity, this object moves with a sinister purpose. In simulations, astronomers input data from three atlases into trajectory models used for gravity slingshot maneuvers, similar to those employed by NASA for planning interplanetary probes. The result was surprisingly accurate. 92.6% match with the predicted flight trajectories. Then something even more sinister happened. When projected forward, its course crosses a narrow spatial corridor just beyond Saturn's orbit. Some theorists suggest this corridor as a place of hypothetical zero gravity or even as a portal to the external heliopause. Simply put, the object does not drift. It departs, doing so with a level of coordination that no known natural body has ever demonstrated. Timing, positioning, acceleration. All this indicates not just movement, but navigation, not discovery, but the execution of a mission that seems almost complete. And at that moment, the object disappears. While the James Webb Telescope was preparing for another high-tech scan, an object was 2.5 astronomical units from the Sun, and three atlases began to dim, both chemically and thermally. The nickel spectral lines dimmed, the carbon dioxide emissions slowed down, the periodic light curve flattened, and suddenly the object dropped below the detection threshold of the Webb telescope. Not due to distance or obstacles, but because it completely stopped glowing. It was not a natural fading. It was a shutdown. All observable behaviors ceased for 11 hours. Instruments around the world confirmed this. Gemini, Subaru, the very large telescope, even ground-based infrared telescopes in Chile recorded the same. The three atlases retreated into the cold. The silence was instant, deliberate, almost like an act of camouflage, or, worse, like the end of a transmission. If the three atlases had been transmitting, radiating, and responding until this moment, perhaps they were not hiding. Perhaps they were searching, activating, or testing. And when they found what they were looking for, they simply stopped. Like a machine shutting down after completing the last protocol, leaving us not with answers, but with a terrible realization that we were never in control. We are merely observers of something much older and more patient than we could imagine. Just when scientists thought the three atlases had completed their passage through the solar system, something impossible appeared in the latest trajectory models. Their course, initially intended as a somersault around the sun followed by a disappearance into deep space, changed slightly, yet significantly. Instead of moving further, it shifted slightly back toward the inner system. It was not a gravitational anomaly. Mathematics was precise, the vectors confirmed it. Three atlases, now silent and dark, changed course, but not by chance. The revised path crossed a specific zone between Earth and Venus, an area known for its stable gravitational dynamics, but also, interestingly, one of the few regions where several Earth satellites had recently reported periodic signal disturbances. NASA initially dismissed the course change as an observational error, but when three separate deep space radar stations, Goldstone, Arecibo, and China's fast antenna, confirmed the change, everything changed. No comet changes its course after it fades, no natural object heads into a low detectability zone. And, of course, nothing irrational maneuvers with such surgical precision. Unless, of course, it was designed to remain something. While engineers and astronomers rushed to restore optical contact with three objects, a completely different discovery was unfolding in the laboratory of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. There, an artificial intelligence neural system was trained on terabytes of spectroscopic data from the internet and observations using the Gemini telescope, not to detect elements, but to search for structure. And it found it. The emission pattern of nickel and carbon dioxide, visualized over time and adjusted for rotational vibrations, formed a multidimensional spiral, a twisted structure embedded in the time series of emissions. At first, it seemed meaningless. But in comparison with the earliest biological structures of Earth, a disturbing similarity emerged. Early ribonucleic acid molecules, not perfect matches, but geometric parallels, recursions, folds, proportions, enough to make molecular biologists ponder. What if three objects do not just emit gas? What if they release a coded biological matrix? Not living, not cells, but something older, like a template, a signal transmitted not in sounds but in chemistry, like a seed sealed in amber, waiting for the right environment to germinate. What if Earth or Mars or some predetermined point in the solar system is already prepared to receive this code? While researchers tried to restore visual contact, a radar ping experiment was conducted, standard tracking of deep space objects. But this time the signal was reflected not from three objects but from an unexpected direction, from the far side of the moon. The signal turned out to be not an ordinary echo. It returned 0.23 seconds earlier and with spectral artifacts that did not match the original waveform. At first, the anomaly was explained by the unevenness of the surface, but then it happened again and again. After 3 consecutive attempts, the signal returned not only distorted but also modulated with a specific pattern. A pattern that had the same time intervals as the impulses recorded from 3 objects weeks earlier. It was then that the lunar data archives were analyzed, revealing something horrifying. During the passage of Oumuamua in 2017, similar modulations were weekly recorded at the same coordinates. The pattern returned. It was not a comet visiting the solar system. It was a system responding to something it had learned. And now, when the moon reflected alien frequencies, a new opportunity arose. The 3 objects were not intruders. They were a trigger, and whatever was buried beneath the lunar crust had just been activated. 2 weeks after the sudden shutdown of the 3-ion Atlas, the James Webb Telescope resumed its scheduled deep observations. However, something had changed. Anomalies in the background were detected in several objects, such as distant quasars and exoplanets, not in the stars themselves, but in the interstellar medium between them. A weak, rhythmic fading, low-frequency oscillations. When the anomalies synchronized, they formed a repeating series. 7 pulses followed by silence, then again 7. And as the scientists traced these events across galactic coordinates, they noticed something alarming. Each line of sight passed through a corridor aligned with the trajectory of 3-ion Atlas. Conclusion: 3-ion Atlas emitted not just something, it was part of a relay, a circuit, a beacon, or worse, a countdown that had already begun. Whether it was a warning or an activation, no one could say. But one thing was clear. This event was no longer local. The unrest spread throughout the galaxy, and here, we stand on the edge of something we cannot see, hearing echoes of a protocol that was never initiated. Yet, it is us who are being answered. We thought we were alone, as we heard no voices. We assumed that silence meant safety and emptiness meant absence. But now we understand that this is not the case. The James Webb Telescope captured not just a strange object. He recorded the execution of the program, the trajectory too clean, the chemistry too precise, the frequency too rhythmic. 3-ion Atlas did not transmit a message. He executed the sequence that altered gravity around, the sequence that reflected from the moon, a sequence that triggered electromagnetic oscillations deep within our planet. And now we face an unspeakable truth, a truth that eludes official reports and whispers in the night laboratories. This was not our first contact. Perhaps it isn't even a contact at all, because it feels more like a realignment than communication. What if Tri-I Atlas was not meant to interact with us, but to awaken something else? What if he came here not for exploration, but to check off a box, transmit a code, test the connection, confirm that the dormant link still works? And as soon as that happened, he just stopped. He didn't leave. He dissolved into silence, into the system, into those places we no longer visit. And this is where the main horror lies. Not in the fact that we saw something alive, but in that we witnessed the mechanism of something much older, completing a task we cannot even begin to understand. And now, whatever happens next, it was set in motion long before we built our first telescope. They were the ones who waited for us to look at them.